Our speaker today is Gerry Murphy. I have a little bit of information on him. I'm sure he'll tell us much more. He was born in Dublin, Ireland. He was a former priest of the Oakland Diocese in California. He's a freelance writer and an online language tutor. He has an interest in evolutionary spirituality and cultural trends, and he currently resides in Damascus. So, Gerry?
Thank you, Aaron. Well, I'm not new to everyone here. I am new to some of you, and I kind of want to begin with a little bit of an apology. And the reason for that is that I started coming here last November. I think it was the weekend of Dia de los Muertos when we celebrate the month of the deceased. And I kind of snuck in the door and took a seat. And when the presenter invites any new people to stand up and introduce themselves, I declined to do that. So I kind of feel bad about that. I'm not sure why I did decline it. I think one of the reasons was I wasn't sure I was going to stay for the full service. I'd never attended a service here before. And I'm thinking, well, if this is a group of cultic weirdos, I'm out the door, So that was one reason I rationalized my not introducing myself. I think the other reason, which is pretty lame, is that I was out here before. And that was, 2011, 2012. At that time, I was director at Jubilee House Retreat Centre in Abingdon. And I was married at that time to Andrea Canelopoulos. And she gave a talk back here, again, I think it was 2011, 2012. So I was out here, but I wasn't at the service. I was in the back room with our two kids, keeping a lid on things back there. So that was my other lame rationalization. So I want to make up for that today by giving you, building a little on Aaron's introduction, so you know who this skinny Irish guy is and where he comes from, what he does. So I'm going to do it in two parts. First part is what I'm going to call a remote introduction, and then I'll bring it up to date. And the remote one was inspired by Steve. I don't know, was it January? Steve was up here talking about he had just done the Ancestry.com DNA test, right? And had a major revelation. He discovered that he thought was a little bit of German in his ancestry, but discovered it was actually 80%. Was it 80% German, Steve? 81% German. So I'm thinking, later that day I was thinking to myself, well, I don't need to do a DNA test. I'm Irish. I was born and raised in Ireland. My parents were born and raised in Ireland, as were their parents before them, and so on and so forth. So I'm good, right? Not quite. Think about the Irish, and this will be of interest to anyone who has Irish ancestry. The Irish are quite a hybrid race. I mean, predominantly we are Celts, we are Celtic. However, a lot of people in this area seem to have Scotch-Irish ancestry, and I've often been asked, what does that mean? Well, all it really means is that Ireland was colonized by Great Britain for about 800 years. And as that period was coming to an end, the country was kind of politically gerrymandered. So you had Scottish settlers, or planters, as we called them, come over from Scotland and settle in the northern part of the country. There are 6 counties. It's politically now known as Northern Ireland. The nationalist Catholic community don't like that term. But anyway, so they came over, and they kept that foothold of British control and occupancy in that part of Ireland. And those are your Scottish planters and settlers. They were mostly Presbyterian. Okay? So they very much wanted to maintain the union with Great Britain, as opposed to the Catholic nationalist people who were very papist. Okay. So you got the Scotch-Irish. So am I Scotch-Irish? Probably not. However, if you go back a little bit into Irish history, if you go back to the Norman period around the 12th century, you had the Anglo-Normans. They invaded Britain, Wales, and Ireland. So there's a possibility there could be a little bit of Norman ancestry in me. But if you go back a little bit further to the Middle Ages, and I don't know if any of you have ever been to Ireland, but if you have, and if you've traveled around some of the monastic ruins, you'll recall seeing those beautiful round towers. Does that ring a bell? Okay, maybe not. And these round towers were built around the 10th, 12th century. And usually in these monastic settlements, and they were built for two reasons. One was refrigeration in the summer when they used to have nice summers back there. And the other reason was protection against Vikings. So you had the Vikings coming from the Scandinavia invading Ireland, and they did come around the Middle Ages, and they stayed long enough to infiltrate our gene pool. So you had the Vikings, you had the Anglo-Normans, the Scotch-Irish, but if you go back even further, you have apparently Spanish and North African traders who, even dating pre-Celtic times, apparently made trips and voyages to that part of Europe. And in fact, there was one incident, that was in the 1500s, where the Spanish Armada ship apparently shipwrecked off the coast of Ireland, and we think they came aboard and maybe settled in Ireland. But pre-Celtic times, you had sailors coming from parts of western Morocco, northern Africa, and definitely Spain. You're talking over 10,000 years ago, and they made those explorations. Whether they stayed long enough to infiltrate our genes, we're not sure. But here's the thing, a lot of people think Irish are fair-skinned, freckles and red hair. Well, I don't have red hair, too many freckles, and my mum used to say when I was growing up, you have sallow skin, and I never knew what that meant. Does that mean I'm yellow skin, or what does sallow skin mean? So you have what's called the dark Irish. They have a darker complexion, dark hair, and dark eyes. And when I had hair, wavy bangs, and I did, it was very, very dark. And I have dark eyes, and I don't have too many freckles. So if I were to run a DNA test like Steve, it could be a mixture of Anglo-Norman, Spanish, North African, definitely Celt, probably not Scotch-Irish. So it's a really mixed hybrid complexity of race. So just throwing that out in case anyone believes they're Irish, you need to discover, well, what DNA strand of Irishness are you? And I certainly don't know mine. Okay. The second part of just bringing myself up to date is how did I end up in southwest Virginia from a little town in the northwest of Ireland? I came over to the United States in July 1999. Prior to that, I grew up in a very devotional, traditional Catholic family. 2 sisters, mom and parents. We weren't very well off, but we were daily devotional, praying, traditional Catholics. And in the north of Ireland, with that conflict between the predominantly Protestant community and the nationalist Catholic community, religion was very much your badge of identity. It was like living in a ghetto mentality in terms of your faith and the practice of your religion. So that's the environment that I grew up in. So on my mom's side of the family, there were a number of priests. Her sister was a missionary sister in Kenya, in East Africa, for over 50 years. And we'd received these beautiful postcards from places like Mombasa, on the coast, from Kenya. So it kind of ignited an imagination within me to become a missionary priest, to go out and evangelize dark Africa, or wherever I would be sent. So that was part of my journey. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school. We don't call it a high school. It was called a grammar school, the school that I attended. It used to be a minor seminary. But when I attended it, it was not a minor seminary, but it was all boys, and we were taught by priests and lay teachers as well. But there was a very strong Catholic ethos present in that high school. So there was a certain expectation that some of those boys would go into a major seminary and become ordained priests. So that was a seed that was planted a little bit. Didn't really take root in me, not at that point. So I went through that school, went to a community college, went to college, did all of that. But at that point, something did ignite within me to revisit that missionary idea and become possibly a missionary priest of some kind. So after college, I actually did join a missionary congregation. And I stayed with them for about 7.5 years. And I was almost finished. And I would have been going probably to Nigeria, Brazil, or the Philippines. However, my health broke down at that point. I developed what's called chronic fatigue syndrome, or they call it ME in the UK and in Ireland, and that scuppered. That scuppered everything for me. I eventually had to leave, and I was in a real quandary. I mean, what do you do with your life when you've spent 7, almost 8 years in a particular formation, and suddenly the rug is pulled from under your feet? So with this particular condition, I was in a period of about 3 to 7 years recuperating from that and trying to figure out my life and what to do and where to go. So I was meeting with a priest psychotherapist, and over a 3-year period we figured, well, you're getting better, you're getting stronger, let's try something new. So he said, well, I've got connections in the Oakland Diocese. You've got Berkeley, free speech, good energy, good weather, all of that. Why not try that? So I thought, okay. I had been to the United States once before, and that was in 1989. I was part of a program for reconciling Catholic and Protestant teenagers called the Ulster Project. And it's been going now for about 30 years. So I came over to the United States in 1989 as the Catholic counselor with a group of Protestant Catholic teenagers, and I ended up in Nashville, Tennessee, for 1 month. From a cooler climate to the hot summers of Nashville, Tennessee for the whole month of July. Great, great experience. So, move forward to 1999. I was going to the left coast. A little bit of a difference in culture, a little bit of a difference in climate, and a very diverse ethnic population. So I took him up on his suggestion, and I ended up doing that. So I ended up spending a couple of years at a seminary just south of San Francisco. So I was still very much in my Catholic mold of thinking and mindset and theology at that point. However, I did not go to a diocesan seminary. I went to a missionary college where we got to study quite a diversity of spirituality and theology. I studied cultural anthropology. I studied feminine theology. So I got world religions. I got a little bit of a mix going on that you wouldn't normally experience at a regular diocesan seminary. So that kind of inspired me to think a little more broadly and to evolve a little in my spirituality. So I did 2 years at this seminary in Menlo Park in California, got ordained, and I was an associate pastor then for a few years on the East Bay in the Oakland Diocese at a really very progressive, vibrant parish. There were a lot of good things going on there. A lot of great social justice activism, great youth ministry, all of that. I really had a fun time. And I had a great mentor as a pastor. And it was just 3 years. Over those 3 years, I did do a lot of soul searching. My reading was expanding. I was reading people like Brian Swim, who actually was one of the parishioners at the church where I attended. He still is, I believe. And Brian's he's a great scientist, gravitational cosmologist, whatever he is, a physicist, wonderful mind, wonderful, wonderful intellect. And he would give talks at the church. So I was very inspired by him. People like Ken Wilber, Dermot O'Murphy, an Irish former priest who's now a great, great writer and evolutionary thinker. His seminal book, Quantum Theology. And he's written 13, 14 books since then. So these people were influencing my thinking. They were evolving and expanding my spiritual horizons. And after a 3-year period, along with that, what got me regrouping a little bit on my vocation to the ordained ministry was there were a lot of allegations in the press and on the news about dioceses going bankrupt, Catholic dioceses going bankrupt right across the United States. How or why? Out of court settlements for priests who had gotten into sexual molestation and allegations. So the public persona of a priest was getting a little scary. And someone brought an allegation against my pastor, and it got into the newspapers, and it was completely unfounded. It was kicked out by the civil court. It was kicked out by the ecclesiastical tribunal. But it was a huge public embarrassment to him. I mean, he was the chancellor of the diocese. At one point, we were at a parish that was 4,300 families. So he was a high public profile figure in that part of Oakland. But it took the wind out of his sails, and it took the wind out of my sails, and it certainly got me regrouping about, did I really want to spend the rest of my life as this public persona? It only takes one person to bring an allegation against you, and you're in real trouble. So that shook me up a little bit, along with revisiting whether I wanted to continue as a single celibate priest. That's required by the Catholic Church. And the day I got ordained, I made that promise to my bishop, but was I 100% certain that I would follow through on that? No, not at all. I'd been in a couple of relationships. I'd known intimacy and companionship, but I felt a compelling sense to be ordained as a priest. So that was what was foremost in my mind and heart. But I decided I needed to regroup, revisit my vocation. So I asked for a leave of absence. I was going through a lot of soul searching, and I was given a 1-year leave of absence where they pay your salary, cover your benefits, all of that. And I really knew at that point I probably was not going to go back. So I knew that I needed to expand my humanity, my human needs and hungers, and explore and search that. And I needed to expand my spirituality and my theological searching. So I really kind of knew, but I stayed the year. And 9 months into that year, I met the woman who would become my wife, Andrea Canelopoulos. We met online, and we jumped into this, what we thought was a really super providential, compatible relationship. And we were engaged after 5 weeks, and we got married 5 months after we met. So it was fast-track relationship. Do I regret it? No. I was old enough, mature enough, as was she, to make a good decision, so I have no regrets about that. However, our relationship lasted 10 years, and we split up 4 years ago. We have 2 beautiful children, 9 and 11. But over those 10 years, there was a lot of flux in moving around our circumstances, careers, jobs. I think I've lived now in 6 states, and I've worked as a funeral director, a campus minister, English teacher. I've been around. Would I have written that script for myself coming over to the States in July 1999? No, I'm a simple, settled kind of person. Just put me in a community, let me write a few books, do a little teaching, do whatever it is I do, and I'm good. I don't want to be moving around the United States, job to job, home to home, dragging kids. But that's what we did. It wasn't a script I would ever have foreseen or written. But I don't regret any of it, because somewhere in your consciousness, you're choosing, I believe, these experiences. You don't have total control of them, but there's some choice element going on for personal and spiritual growth. And for whatever life lessons these experiences will teach you, and whatever life lessons you will impart as a result. That's kind of how I look at it. So I would just say that those were years when a lot of evolution was going on within me, spiritually, theologically, and I feel blessed and enriched because of that. I don't have regrets or resentment. That's a waste of time and energy. So I don't go there. And I'm in a good enough place right now. I do some freelance writing and some teaching online and that kind of thing, and I'm trying to get into more ministry work on the side. Okay, so that's basically who I am, without filling in any gaps, more or less. And that brings me to what I want to dovetail into what I want to talk about, and it is about expanding and evolving spiritually in terms of our thinking and our humanity. Back in my high school years, I was fascinated with science. I loved going to biology class, physics, chemistry, all of that, and looking under the microscope or learning about, the new laws of physics, what's coming up in quantum mechanics and gravitational whatever out there in the universe and other universes, and I was just fascinated by that. I wasn't good at science. I flunked science, I flunked math. And I was at a grammar school, so we didn't just do science. You studied them as individual, singular disciplines for 7 years. Hardcore academic school, this one. And I didn't make the cut. So it was a mixture of being fascinated by science. I marveled at what science could tell us about life and about evolution, but I questioned the materialistic, the empirical, the hardcore data of science, and I would wonder in a more philosophical way, aren't we touching into the mystical here? There's more to this than just hardcore empirical data. We're touching into something that's way more than that. And even Einstein and Isaac Newton, they knew that. They wrote about that. And many others since then have done as well. You're getting into something where you're kind of a little bit out of your depth. Right now we're developing artificial intelligent computers. Quantum computers is the next thing. And they're all Microsoft, Google, they're all at it. They're all trying to win that race. And it's going to change the face of the digital age as we know it right now. But my take on science was I wanted to come at it from a second. I'm going to quote something just from one of my chapters here. What I was trying to do here, and one of the chapters in my book is a designer God, ? And just to mix my metaphors a little bit, what I'm doing in that chapter is I'm putting science under the microscope. Why? Because I'm looking for some intelligent design. But I'm not just looking for any kind of intelligent design. I'm looking for a loving, intelligent, like a universal, loving, intelligent design that isn't just doing this willy-nilly in some kind of impersonal, clinical way, but there's a loving dimension to the intelligent design that I am searching for. Okay? So that's what I'm at in the chapter, An Intelligent God, or a Designer God, ? And I have fun with it because my style of writing is, I'm not an academic, I'm not a scholar. I think I would describe myself as a curious intellectual with a sense of humor. That's basically who I am. And if you do read my book, that's what you're going to get. So I just want to quote for you one point here. Let's see where it is. Yeah, this is where I see science going. In this paradigm-shifting world where science and theology are increasingly intersecting in a symbiosis of elegance and meaning, and where the deeper spiritual thinker has long outgrown the canonized and inhibiting strictures of formal religion, preferring instead to explore the deep-time implications of our human existence, set against a backdrop of daily new discoveries in our microscopic, subatomic, and macroscopic expanding universe story. It would seem to me that the spirituality of our times is quantum spirituality. Now, I'm not going to get into quantum spirituality because that's a topic for another day, perhaps. But that's where I see it going. I'm fascinated with where theology and science intersect. And they are intersecting more and more every day. Why? Because they have to. They have to. We have biologically evolved. I think we've peaked in terms of our biological evolution. So the only other place to go is psychic and spiritual evolution. There is no other place to go. So it's only a matter of time before we all get on board with that and bring the spiritual and the theological into the scientific conversation. I mean, Eric was talking for a couple of weeks on the topic of artificial intelligence and the future of robotic computers and so on. And I discussed that in my book in the chapter, A Transhumanist Age. And to me, it's like we're rushing forward with the digital revolution, which is amazing and mesmerizing. But it has to be a conversation with a lot of other thinkers so that the ethical, the moral, the spiritual components of that conversation are given adequate consideration. That's all I want to say on that. But in my chapter in the book, A Transhumanist Age, I go into deep discussion on that. When I'm coming toward the end of the chapter, A Designer God, this is kind of how I come into land. Oh, pardon me. All right. In the final analysis, the uncontainable, ever new, ever emergent, ever evolving, ever whimsical, ever surprising, ever chaotic, ever paradoxical light energy of the divine, call it Holy Spirit, divine energy, divine consciousness, interpenetrates every breath we take and every experience we have as conscious human beings. Birth, rebirth, and the rhythms of life, music and the heartbeat of creation, evident in every cell and molecule that constitutes our known universe, attest to a universal loving intelligence that knows how to heal, renew, grow, expand, organize, and reorganize itself as the ever-changing circumstances of its environment demand. A few years ago, I got into reading a great teacher, Andrew Cohen. I'm not sure if that name rings a bell with you. He's from the United States, but he spent many years in India studying under, gurus and pundits and teachers over there. And then he kind of dropped off the scene a little bit. I think he felt he had fallen out of favor with his followers to some extent and dropped out of the scene a little bit. But now he's back in and he's giving talks in Paris and around the world. But he wrote a wonderful book a few years ago called Evolutionary Enlightenment. And I don't think it had a subtitle. I think that was the only... And I loved his book. I read it a few times. And there's one little phrase in the book that he keeps bringing up, and it simply is evolutionary impulse. And really what that means is that's the energy that propels the universe story forward. It's the evolutionary impulse of creation itself. It's the heartbeat of creation, if you will. And that's been there since the inception of life as we know it, what we refer to as the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, or whenever it was. So he calls that the evolutionary impulse. And he would say that if we go into deep meditation, into a place of silence and stillness, then linear time has no meaning really. You're in a place of silence and stillness, and that place or that state of consciousness really brings you back to the very beginning, because at the very, very beginning, all those chemicals and elements and protons and particles, they are what eventually created the circumstances we needed for a planet Earth and for life as we know it. So you're part of that evolutionary impulse from the very beginning. And you continue to be part of it by being part of what propels the universe forward and its energy. So he calls it the evolutionary impulse. So what fascinates me is that you have to wonder, well, if that's the case, why don't I feel this evolutionary impulse every morning when I get out of bed or have aches and pains or I'm depressed and angry? I'm not feeling like I'm propelling the universe forward. So what's with that? And he says that as human beings, we need to take those moments to pause and to marvel. Because in his words, we are the cutting edge of the evolution. I'm not sure that I'm in total agreement with that, but what he means by that is, as Brian Swim puts it, we are the universe come to consciousness. So when you're out there at night and you're gazing up the canopy of stars and all the galaxies, or whatever you're gazing at in creation, or you're marveling at the created order that we cannot fully understand, that's the universe marveling at itself. We are the universe. So he would say you're the cutting edge, because what distinguishes us from other forms of life, animal, plant, or even inanimate life, all of which have a state of consciousness, is quite simple. We know that we are aware. Okay? Plant life and animal life, as far as we know, do not know that they are aware, even though they are conscious. We do. So that seems to put us in some kind of a privileged position, as he would put it. Those are not really my words, but I kind of agree with the gist of what he says there. We are the universe come to consciousness. We have a tremendous responsibility then in how we integrate that in propelling the universe story forward. Okay? So again, how do you translate that into ordinary everyday life and relationships? I would say you simply do that by never ever allowing your personal growth, your spiritual growth, and your intellectual curiosity to stagnate. Okay? Never allow your personal, spiritual, and intellectual curiosity to stagnate. And I don't think any of you do. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, because the fact that you guys are here and I'm here, we're searching. We're spiritual seekers. We're spiritual searching. We're trying to put a meaning and a purpose onto why we're here, where we're going, and what is our legacy. Okay? So we're trying to move forward with that unfolding story of the consciousness, loving energy of the universe itself, and to be part of it. And I would just say, in exploring the new, in experiencing the new, and becoming the new in our lives, that's how we grow. We explore it, we look for it, we become it, we experience it, and we become it. In that way, we become an emergent being on an evolutionary path. And if you can see your life through that lens, I think that can bring healing and illumination. Okay, I'm coming into land, so relax. Two movies came to my mind when I was thinking what I would talk about today. Maybe they're odd choices, but they came to my mind. One is Jerry Maguire. Do you remember that one? Came out, I don't know, in the late 90s. Tom Cruise and, what's her name? Renee Zellweger. Is that right? Okay. She plays Dorothy Boyd in the movie, and he's this big hotshot sports guy, agency, but he gets a little disillusioned with the organization that he works for and decides to leave and kind of, form his own group of, working with these professional athletes and whatnot. But no one is in favor of what he's trying to do. He's trying to be more honest and authentic and cut through the corruption and the money and so on. And she joins him, and eventually they get married. And she's a single mom, I think, at that point, I think. Okay. So they do this, but then something ruptures in their relationship and they split. And there's this beautiful moment, and this is the scene you will remember if you've seen that movie, where he's off somewhere. They've split up, so they're separated. She's together at her home with her girlfriends, her women friends and companions, and they're having a great session, reflecting on life and its difficulties and its challenges and so on. He's off celebrating some major success with his new company, And then he has a moment of epiphany. He suddenly dawns on him, yes, I'm successful. Yes, this was a good decision. Yes, I have people with me. But it's not where I need to be, or it's not where I want to be. Okay? So off he goes, flies back to wherever they're living. And there's this very moving scene where he walks in the door, and you've 10, 12 women with his separated spouse, and there's all this chatting going on. He walks in the door, and there's silence, and there's this tension in the air. And he goes into this speech, I can't remember, we live in a cynical world full of crazy competitors and blah, blah, blah. And then he looks at Dorothy Boyd, he says, I love you. You complete me. Remember that? And there's this silence, and then he continues to try and say some more, but she says, stop right there. You got me at hello. And then they embrace and so on. Okay. I think it's a beautiful, tender moment. It's a moment of, because here's what's happening in that moment. The human heart, in terms of emotionally and spiritually relating to the world, only does two things. It contracts or it expands. Okay? Now, our hearts are contracting over what happened in Florida. And I lived there when they had the other atrocity in Miami. Pardon me, not Miami, Orlando. So our hearts contract at those moments of tragedy and despair and disillusionment. But when we see hope and new life and new beginnings, our hearts expand. Or when we have a moment of epiphany. He had a moment of epiphany. And his heart is expanding. So in that moment, he's been an evolutionary being, or an emerging being on an evolutionary path. Now, I think the line, you complete me, is overrated, to be honest with you. It's a beautiful, tender moment, but you can't ask or expect another person to complete you. That's an unrealistic burden to put on anyone. They can help you grow, and you can help them grow, but they cannot complete you. But it's a beautiful moment of epiphany, of illumination, of self-revelation, of growing. The other movie that came to my mind that sort of kind of dovetails out of that one is As Good as It Gets. Remember that one with Jack Nicholson? And it's this kind of quirky movie where he's this sort of obsessive, compulsive, reclusive writer, and quite a successful writer, I think. He goes to this restaurant every day, and he meets up with the waitress. Helen Hunt plays that part, and she's a single mom, and she's like half his age. And there's another person that forms this quirky friendship, a gay man. So the three of them form this kind of unlikely alliance or friendship. But between Nicholson and Helen Hunt, they do form some kind of a relationship. And she was back at his apartment one evening, and I don't remember that scene, but after that incident at the apartment, they know there's a kinship, there's some kind of connection, even though he's like twice her age. And there's this restaurant scene where he's fumbling to find the words to pay her a compliment. And he goes into this whole thing about, I hate doctors and I hate medicines and all that stuff, but I decided the other morning I would just get up and start on my medicine regimen and the whole thing. And she's listening and like, why are you telling me all this? I'm not really interested in what you're... And he says, I'm trying to pay you a compliment. And she's like, not getting it. What do you mean? You're cleaning up your act. You're up back in your meds. Well, how's that a compliment? And there he is, this wonderful writer who's a wordsmith, trying to find the words, and he simply pauses for the longest moment and replies, you make me want to be a better man. And in that moment she realizes, I understand what you're saying. She had inspired him enough to make a fundamental change in his life, which no one else in his entire life had ever done for him. That's moving out of your comfort zone and stretching yourself to grow because you care enough. You care enough for yourself, you care enough for others, and you care enough for the world that you live in. Okay. Let me just quote a short little section from the very chapter that I base this little talk on, which is called Always Beginning Again. And I'll wrap it up there, I promise. Okay. All right. I believe it is not an overstatement to say that my life to date has been characterized by much change, flux, readjustment, and beginning again. And what have I learned from all this? I'll sum it up in one sentence. The emergence of the new does not invalidate or negate what has gone before. On the contrary, it elevates it to a higher level of meaning that is bigger than everyone and everything around me. The paradoxical nature of it all is this. Vibrant new life and possibilities are born of death, dissolution, and dust. Just think of the one supernova explosion that occurred billions of years ago, spewing out dust, gases, and elements that would one day become our solar system and eventually the precise conditions for the evolution of life on our little planet Earth. What my life has taught and continues to teach me is this. Every moment, person, and experience we encounter along the way increases our capacity to understand the ever-evolving and complexifying nature of reality a little more. So I really just would say working on what makes you evolve and expand your heart and your mind and your spirit will help you and help me to become very much that more and more the emergent being, the angelic being that we are all called and gifted, to be. That's how I see it. I don't have any more to say. I'll sneak back to my seat unless there's a question or a comment, and I thank you for your time and attention.